Welcome back to another beautiful session of yoga philosophy and Bhagavad Gita study with myself and my dear friend Jagai and our wonderful community that has been showing up to study and mostly to dialogue. I think that's what I appreciate most about these sessions is yes, we are studying and going over the texts, unpacking the translations, looking at the Sanskrit, but really what I get most out of these sessions is the ability to dialogue about it and what these things, these texts and these teachings mean for us in our lives and how we can apply them directly today. So here we are, another week. Thank you all for joining us. And we are going to do as we normally do. We'll open with our invocation. Let me share the screen so you can put that up, Jagai.
And also to those that listen later, because we did a field trip in LA, and some people said that they download the videos and watch them later.
Yep.
This is for you too. Though you can participate in this, but we're doing this class for you.
Yes. Awesome. Yeah, and if you're watching these later and you are local to the Long Beach area and you want that sort of in-person interaction, once a month we have our kirtans at the studio where we have a satsang so that we can have kirtan and discuss things. But we will start with the invocations and then we'll dive into where we left off last week, which was the end of chapter 2. And we were talking about the threefold miseries last time and discussing attachment. We talked about the threefold miseries. So let's see if we can remember what those are as we dive into today's class. But first, let's do our invocations. Jagai, if you'd like to lead us.
Sure. And I think we've matured past first verse, and we shall start chanting both verses in these classes. Okay, so let's all just read it together. Om Jnana Tamarandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Sayam Kadamayan Padati Sva Padantikam. I was born in the darkest ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with a torch of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. When will Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada, who is established within this material world, the mission to fulfill the desire of Lord Chaitanya, give me shelter under his lotus feet? And as a plug to my new podcast, Bhakti Tattva, their latest post answers the question, what is the mission, the desire of Lord Chaitanya? I'll leave it in secret so you can go watch it. Bhakti Tattva. I don't remember my own URL. Bhakti Tattva substack.com, or send me your email and I'll add you. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Is it to have every city in the world sing kirtan?
Yes. Very good. Very good.
Watch it.
Yeah. Actually, I haven't even looked at it from this place, but this is my podcast. I'm really hoping to get others involved to write articles and say things. I don't want it to just be me. But this talks about Bhaktivinoda Thakur, whose mission was to fulfill Chaitanya's mission. And I'll leave it at that. You can watch it and you can listen to it. Okay, so Bhagavad Gita today, we are 10 verses away from finishing chapter 2. So Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, text, was it 63? I think we were.
64. And who remembers what the threefold miseries were?
I remember that it matters what caused them. So like whether the world caused it or the misery is caused by myself, and I'm blanking on the third cause.
Other people. So like other people, or then there's just like the natural elements of the world, like the pandemic happened, but then there's people in your life that you deal with. that create miseries. And then there's what's in your mind.
Yeah. So it's through Adhyatmaka, Adhibodhika, and Adhidaivaka. Adhyatmaka, like the Atma, is also means the self, so your own issues. I've been actually listening to a meditation series by Sam Harris. And what's interesting about that is he approaches meditation from a complete mechanistic perspective, means your consciousness is nothing but an interaction of your mind and body. And at the time of death, you die. But still, if you go through his meditation course, he speaks about how the mind is the source of pretty much all of your suffering, and goes through the process of deconstructing the complexities that the mind goes through to try to focus the mind on being in the moment and recognizing that the self is false, means your conception of yourself, which is making suffering, is false. And that's Adhyatmaka, like textbook Vedic teachings 101. And then Adhibodhika would be others. I'm sorry. Yeah, other people, thieves or friends that are not really friends. And Adhidaivaka would be the world, nature, gods, weather. Just like today, my kids are home from school because North Laguna is on fire. And so they've closed down all the schools and everybody's freaking out because a fire broke out. So that is definitely Adhidaivaka. Cool. That's the threefold miseries.
So interesting because, when we first went over this, my initial impulse to answer was lust, anger, and greed.
Yeah.
But those, I think, are more finite expressions of agitations of the mind, agitation caused by others, and agitation, right? That lust, anger, and greed rises from initially the way our mind is orienting with the things around us. So it like, for me anyways, it helps me understand more of a root cause of like, well, why do those things rise up anyways? Mm-hmm. Lust, anger, and greed,
Yeah, well, that's, it's not completely inaccurate. Mm-hmm. And this is a great example here. So let's look at this translation. Prabhupada says, for one thus satisfied in Krishna consciousness, or prasadhe, mercy. One's got the mercy. Sarva dukkhanam. The real translation of that is all unhappiness. But Prabhupada has called it the threefold miseries of material existence. So this is an amazing and perfect example of why we follow a guru-disciplic succession to try to understand Bhagavad Gita. Because if I said to, I don't know, my teenager, what is all unhappiness? He would have a very different answer than if I asked my 11-year-old, or if I asked my father, if I asked Bill Gates, like Jeff Bezos is struggling because the world's largest yacht ever created in the world he owns, and he can't get it into his parking space because there's a bridge that the yacht is too big to get under, and he wants the city to take the bridge down so he can put his super yacht there. So if I asked Jeff Bezos, what is sarva dukkhanam? He would say, this bridge. But Prabhupada has made it clear that what it really, really means is the threefold miseries of material existence. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think that, like I was saying, this translation by Prabhupada lends a deeper perspective of what we might even refer to as what Krishna is talking about in the flowery language of the Vedas, right? This little bit of like, it's kind of fluff and it's ideal, but it's so big and ambiguous that it's almost impossible to like actually apply.
Yeah.
And so when you get these sort of deeper understandings, oh, okay, well, these threefold miseries are really the impetus for all of my material miseries.
Yeah.
Then now I know what I can work on, so that no matter what's going on outside of me, which I don't have control of, then I can at least deal with the one thing that I do have control of, which is my mind.
Yeah. And I think that especially Max, who's a clinical psychologist, can agree that a lot of suffering comes from the mind.
And let me just also add to that is I'm learning more and more that even from what I can control of my mind, I'm really aware that I can't control everything in my mind. So even that I have limited control. So being aware of that helps me orient with the turbulence in my mind.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Okay, so I could do the first two. We'll do 266. One who is not connected with the Supreme in Krishna consciousness can have neither transcendental intelligence nor a steady mind, without which there's no possibility of peace. And how can there be happiness without peace? I've always liked this verse because it's, I don't know, it just seems very practical. You know, if your mind isn't steady, you're not going to have peace. And if you don't have peace, how can you be happy? Good. Any thoughts?
And share a story that can reinforce this.
Yes, sir.
I did meditation for many years before I began on the journey of this practice. And very quickly through mantra, I achieved, something that felt like a euphoria in meditation by japa mala meditation, praying on mala beads that I had not received before in just my silent inside the chaotic pattern of my mind. So I got to know how to observe my mental processes in meditation, but through my ability to focus on a single item, I achieved a deeper meditative state.
Good. I'm glad you shared that story, because most people think that yoga or meditation, which are the same, right? It's so that we can just have a peaceful mind. But it's not that we achieve that peaceful mind because we do those things. It is in steadying our mind, focusing our mind, that we can achieve the peacefulness that we're looking to feel. And so, like Max, you shared, a lot of people come to meditation and yoga and they get really discouraged because they actually become more aware of the noise in the mind, and it becomes even more difficult. They feel even more defeated. And so I think, emphasize the goal is, initially to steady the mind, to focus the mind. And what I've been teaching lately in my class is, because we talked about this early on, Jagai, I don't think you were there for that class. We talked about a verse where Krishna talked about, for one who is focused and is resolute, right? We can achieve more of this peacefulness. But when we are many branched, right, that we sort of dilute out our progress, or I forget the exact words.
Yeah, this me kabut here.
Yes. So I've just been sharing with my students in class is this interesting thing that happens that we're not anticipating, is we think, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to breathe, I'm going to meditate, and I'm going to feel peace. And initially that's not their experience if they're new or just having a rough batch in life. So what I'm doing is having them focus on their breath, narrow down their focus into their breath. And what happens when we actually focus on something is our awareness expands. But when we're scattered and looking at different things, our awareness is really blurred or foggy or noisy, right? And that deeper awareness is what allows us to have that feeling of peacefulness when it isn't foggy and scattered. So when we steady the mind and we focus on one thing, we think we're missing out, or we're diluting ourselves because we're only going in on one area, but really we go narrow and deep, then we actually broaden and expand our awareness and ultimately our consciousness. And with that steady mind, we're able to navigate those things.
Nice, super nice. Great revelations. And this is a really good verse. I just wanted to go over the Sanskrit so that you and the listeners can realize that the Sanskrit in the Bhagavad Gita is really easy. And most of the time, with just a little bit of understanding, you can understand the Sanskrit. So let's take a quick look at it. We all know that na, like no, asti, there is. So there is not. Buddhi, which means intelligence. Ayukta, yukta is and yoga are the same word. So there is not intelligence ayukta without yoga or connection. There is not connection. If there's no connection, there's no bhavana. Bhavana means a fixed mind, like a state. If there is no bhavana, essentially, there is no shantir. What's the word shanti mean? Peace. And if there's a shantir, no peace, what's the question of sukha, happiness? Like the other word was dukkha, unhappiness. So if there's not, if the intelligence is not connected through yoga, there is no yoga, there's no fixed mind. If there's no fixed mind, there's no peace. And if there's no peace, what's the question of happiness? Super simple. Yes, Ashriel.
That was really simple. Thank you for sharing that. And also, I remember you saying that Sanskrit sometimes has words that mean more than one thing. And for some reason, I thought, does sukham have another meaning as well?
Yeah. It also means a parrot. Sukha means a parrot. And it also means happiness.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just noticing the word that is being used for being fixed or steady, right? In other verses, steady is like sta,
Yeah.
right? And this is bhavana, which is a type of fixed mind that has happiness or devotion involved in it. So I was also, I don't remember why I picked this up, but I was just talking about determination in class. Like, determination doesn't have longevity if there isn't some kind of happiness or what was the word specifically? Like, we can only determine ourselves to do something for so long without that feeling of happiness within us before it's going to just fall on its face. Like, we really, in our determination, if we want longevity in it, it was with devotion. I think the word was devotion, actually, a kind like being devoted. If you're determined and not devoted, right, it will only get you so far, but you have to have that devotion in your determination. That's what really gives you the longevity, whatever it is that you're trying to do. But here, I find that so interesting. The word that he's using for steadiness implies that it isn't just a disciplined steadiness thing that you're doing because that's just what you're supposed to do and you have to follow the rules in order to get into the pearly gates of heaven. You really, there needs to be this willingness of heart behind your determination.
Yeah, very nice, very nice. Such a great verse, so simple, right? Just a few simple words and it's so clear. Okay, I'll do one more, then we'll go to Dharma. As a strong wind sweeps away a boat on the water, even one of the roaming senses on which the mind focuses can carry away a man's intelligence. And again, those who are listening, we're using English, but in Sanskrit here, we don't have the gender of a man. It would be a person. So I want to just juxtapose this to the previous verse, because Krishna, if you take it backwards, you can say that there's happiness when there's peace, and there's peace when one is fixed in their intelligence, and one is fixed in their intelligence when they are connected through yoga, right? We're just taking it backwards and putting the positive. It's the exact same thing either way. So to be peaceful and to be connected, one is connected through yoga or situated. But then Krishna says, the very next verse, as a strong wind sweeps away a boat on the water, even one of the roaming senses by which the mind focuses can carry away a man's intelligence. So if you're fixed in yoga, will your intelligence be carried away by one of your roaming senses?
Will you be more aware that your senses are roaming? So you're much better able to, I get what you were doing the verse backwards, but I'm still answering your question. Like that's the whole point of steadiness, right? Is again, back to my point, it broadens your awareness so that you can be aware of when you are unsteady right away. Because if you're all scattered, you don't realize how unsteady you are until something totally knocks you flat on your face.
Yeah. Very nice, very nice. Okay, Dharma, you're up.
All right. Yes. 68. Therefore, O mighty armed, one whose senses are restrained from their objects is certainly of steady intelligence. So we could say an expression of steady intelligence is when you are fixing your senses, you're restraining your senses from being fixated on objects of their affection.
Mm-hmm.
What is night for all beings? Text 69. What is night for all beings is the time of awakening for the self-controlled. And the time of awakening for all beings is night for the introspective sage. This actually makes me think of the pandemic we just went through.
How?
And how a lot of people have, and it comes to this saying too that I think of a lot, is you can be better or you can be bitter. Regardless of what's happening, you can allow it to make you better or you can allow it to make you bitter. And to me, this is how this comes across is, what is night for all beings is the time of awakening for the self-control. That's like everything was being shut down and people were not able to do the things that they were nor used to doing them. And a lot of people just got defeated and shut down, and it became night for them and they just became apathetic. But for some of us who are, a little bit more disciplined and regimented in our practices, a lot of us were saying, no, it is actually a time to reset. It's an opportunity here to make some changes and not to get into that feeling of defeatism that a lot of the world kind of got sucked into.
Super nice, super nice. I had the same kind of similar thought with this. When I think of, let's say, let's take a sadhu. Again, we always use the analogy of Radhana Swami because we know he's a perfect and renounced physically person. But Radhana Swami lives in a very simple room with just mats that he sleeps on. He has just a bottom cloth and a top cloth. Just eats what's offered to him. No bank account, no cell phone, no computer, a razor to shave his head, a little bathroom. And, that isn't much different than maybe a prisoner. Prisoner has a change of clothes, a little room, a little sink, a little bit to eat. But that life for most people is like terrible, right? But for him, the opposite is true. He's awakened in what they say is nighttime darkness. But that's, to him, he's alive and awake in the real consciousness, and he sees the external world with everybody trying to gain and grow and get more stuff and have 1,000 pairs of shoes and all this stuff as actual nighttime and darkness. So it's a very poetic piece. Another thing to recognize as we start to move forward in the Gita is that there's two kinds of verses. One of them is just where Krishna just directly says something so clear, you can just translate it. It's just clear as day. Then there's verses where Krishna is very poetic and like Vedic-like verses, where it's like the Vedas, that you can read them and it's very poetic, and sometimes it's mostly kind of nonsense. You don't even know what they're trying to say. And so here, if you just translate it directly, it says, it's night for every living being, but not for the sage, or for the sage, it's night, but not for every living being. That doesn't make any sense. But for the devotee and for the Arjuna, it's like a piece of poetry that matches with everything going on. So Krishna's very creative in the way he speaks through the Bhagavad Gita, where sometimes it's very poetic and sometimes it's just a straightforward, just statement.
Well, I think that we all benefit from having analogies and having these sort of broader perspectives that allow us to understand deeper meanings that can't always be conveyed just through direct language, or we want to expand and support that direct language with something a little broader. And I also love that this is a very malleable verse. You can even just think, like, what is night for all beings? I think of like early morning hours, like Brahma Muhurta time, like 3 to 6 a.m. Lots of people are just coming in from the bars, and it's still, they're doing their thing, and the yogi is meditating at that time. And then at the time of awakening for all beings, right, is night for introspective sage. So again, the reverse, like when all beings are going out and doing things, again, that sage, that yogi is deciding to not be out, engaged in all this stuff.
Going to sleep to get up in the morning. It's has a lot of parallel meanings. Very nice.
Right.
Okay, Max. 270.
270. Person who is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires that enter like rivers into the ocean, which is ever being filled but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the person who strives to satisfy such desires.
I really like this verse
Yeah.
because I was having a moment the other day where my mind was dealing with some challenges, and I was reminded of this verse to just allow those sort of incessant flows that were coming in to just go back into that big ocean of Krishna, and know that like it can be held there, because that never overflows. And I don't have to hold the choppy waters. I just have to let them flow through me back into that big ocean of the Supreme, and know that it can be contained in all of its aspects in the way that it exists. But I don't need to hold it.
Yeah, that meditative app that I'm just, it's not that I'm like all into it, but I saw it in another podcast, and so I've been going in and looking at it, from Sam Harris. One of this, like the third meditation, is to sit and breathe, and as the desires appear in the mind, which is a very much of a Zen kind of old style Buddhist meditation, they appear, you don't accept them, you don't reject them, they're there, and then you focus back on your breathing. So just like a river comes by, fills the ocean, but the ocean remains steady, the mind, even in these meditations, which have no spiritual connection, is still recognized that the mind should not be like, you shouldn't chase after the mind. Just let it.
Well, and I think we disillusion ourselves in thinking that by trying to make ourselves not accept and not reject, right? To not try to stop or push away, don't engage, but also the pushing away or the denial or the ignoring of those things, or the avoidance of it, or just I don't want to think that way, but I don't want the thoughts to be there. That's all still in some ways engaging with that thing. And so this concept of just really allowing the choppiness of the river, the incessant flow,
Yeah.
like you can't try to stop it and you can't hurry up and rush it. It just, you can't act like it's not there or beat yourself up. All of that stuff is still engaging in it. And so really the only way you can achieve peace is by just allowing the mind to do what it does. And we step back into that bigger ocean.
Yeah, I think a lot of this analogy that kind of, I don't know if I can explain it, but when a thought comes, I can, just like in the regular world, if somebody shows up and they're like, hey, and I'm like, hey, and we hug and we hang out, I'm all engaged now with that person. Or if a person comes up to me and goes, hey, and goes like this, and now I go like this, and now I'm all fighting with them. Either way, I'm all engaged with that person.
Or if you're like running around the corner in the store because you're like, oh, there's that person, I don't want them to see me.
Yeah, either way,
That's
you're
still a type of engagement with it.
Or if they come up to you and they're like, or and you're like,
yeah,
whatever, move on. You're not engaged with them. They go. That's it. You're not attached. So when the thoughts come, those or the is still engaging in the thought. And the real point is to just don't accept, don't reject. It's there. Hi, move on to what you're actually doing. And it takes the steam out of it.
I think that this can be sometimes, it can feel oversimplified or can be difficult for people who are newer to the mindfulness part of the journey. It can be really hard because sometimes those thoughts are about real life scenarios, material life scenarios. Like, but if I don't think about how I'm going to handle that, like I don't want to just avoid it. And it really are these sort of deeper underpinnings of the way in which you are enacting or engaging with those experiences. And I don't know exactly what I'm trying to express, other than if you're watching this later and you're feeling like that sounds a lot easier said than done. It is. All things are easier said than done. However, it is a progressive process of you just keep practicing noticing that the things are there and less getting entangled in them, and it's like when you're a kid and you're walking around and you don't realize that spider webs are everywhere, and sometimes you walk right through a spider web, and then you're like doing this thing and you're just getting more caught up in it, right? And then the next time you walk out, you're all a little skeptical because you don't want to get caught up in the spider web and you're all jumpy, but eventually you learn to just be more aware of, oh, there's a spider web up there. I can see the signs. I felt a little something that's indicating I might be approaching a spider web. I'm not the only one who's like walking through a spider web in a walkway, right? Where you're like, oh my goodness. But you start to notice it more, and the sting, like you were saying, the edge of it or the intensity of it eventually dissolves, and you're much better able to let those things pass through you. And that doesn't mean that you are disassociated from what is going on in your life and the way that you need to show up to it. That's not what it means either. You're not like totally disassociated. And so again, I think that these things are great to talk about, and I just want to reiterate how much of it is a practice, and through the application, whether it's simple or small, whether it's done well or haphazardly, that progress is what allows you to ultimately arrive at these places of deeper awarenesses that give you more of an embodied knowing of what it is that we are discussing here.
Just it was a week ago, without naming names or something, somebody was asking me who was having some trouble, because when I was in my childhood, I had all sorts of traumatic experiences. And they were saying to me, like, so you seem fine, as you don't seem like you have any problems, like these things are not affecting you. And so what did you do to get over it? And honestly, the answer is, I just don't care anymore. Like it does. I'm just like, okay, yeah, that happened. Cool. But I got other things I'm doing. It just doesn't bother me. And so to hold on to those things, like when I was a teenager, I look back and I think, wow, if I could just go back to my teenage self and just say, hey, bro, chill out. It's not that big of a deal. Like, enjoy your day, be happy. Like, let go of it, of the desire to be victimized by your own mind. I would say that I would have suffered way less throughout my youth. Where now, because it's been so long and I just have a different life, though it's still me and it's still things that happen, I am just like, whatever. And so it doesn't bother me. Where I know other people who are still victimized by problems that they've had in their youth, in their old age, they die like that. It's just so much of a connection with it. And as Sam Harris is saying, the false self, not meaning like the material body, but our own painting of who we are. And within that painting, we paint our own struggles, where we could paint the self without the struggles just as easily. I mean, I know it sounds like it's just so easy, but I think when you look back at your life over time, it can be.
Max, you want to say something? You're unmuted, so I just wanted to check in.
Yeah, I'm reading, so I'm unmuted for that, but I did want to share something that regarding meditation. In my therapy practice, a lot of people assume that they will be bad at meditation because they're very aware of how difficult it is to still the mind. But that's a perception of meditation, is my mind has to become still. I have to be able to not think about anything to meditate. So
perception, yeah.
Yeah, it's like having a goal sometimes in this practice will keep you away from achieving it. Like if I were to meditate to think, oh, I'm going to get enlightened, and I'm like trying and trying and trying to get enlightened from meditation, I'm getting frustrated, like, why is it not happening? Well, it's like, well, I'm actually keeping myself from being able to do it by having this misconception of like, this is what it's for. This is
That's great. Thank you.
When I teach my teacher trainers about Patanjali's 8 limbs of yoga, we talk about the difference between concentration and meditation. And a lot of what our general culture nowadays would call meditation is really just the practice of concentration. Because what Patanjali's 8 limbs, his Ashtanga yoga system that he left in his first chapter, in the second chapter, is, you do the first 5 limbs, the yamas, the niyamas, the asana, the pranayam, and the pratyahar. And then you do dharana, which is the concentration. You practice those things, you do them. And as a result of doing those things, and concentration is steadying the mind. Again, it's giving it something to focus on. It's giving it a point of focus to be fixed in. That's what Patanjali describes practice. When his first 2 recommendations he gives for achieving yoga is abhyas, practice, which he defines as being fixed in concentration, and then vairagya, which is dispassion. It's through fixing the mind and being concentrated on something that we then achieve, we experience the result. The experience is meditation. We become so fixed in that thing that we're so absorbed in it that we then now have a super conscious state, kind of like what I'm just realizing now. I'm tying it back to what I'm telling my students. When we focus on something, it broadens our awareness. So a lot of people, when I explain that definition or just that understanding the difference between meditation and concentration, it can alleviate a lot of their self-imposed expectations and stress around the practice of like, it's okay that your mind is busy. We just want to steady the mind. And so to do that, we're going to focus on something. And over time, you'll experience this thing that we are calling meditation. But you don't do meditation in the same way you don't do sleep. Like sleep just happens to you. You have to create the right environment And then sleep happens. You can't teach somebody how to sleep as much as you can't teach somebody how to meditate. It is something that happens to you when you have created the environment that allows the meditation to occur, the experience to happen in the same way sleep does. So when I break it down that way, I find that people can they can wrap their arms around the process a little bit in a more friendly way with themselves without all that pressure of I'm a bad meditator.
Super nice. I like that. Beautiful. And Ashriel has her hand up. She's patiently waiting.
Thank you. I kind of was, as you guys were both talking, you Jagai, about things that you weren't able to, or things that at one point in your life you weren't able to let go of, and then how some people will live really their whole lives identifying with something that happened to them as like owning it as part of their identity for like their whole lives. And I really do think that those things happen to us, or those things happen, and our process over time of how we start to like discover other ways of, I guess, coping or different understandings of those things as just happenings, and kind of start to disassociate them from our actual identity, is part of like a process of discovery that honestly I feel like meditation really helps with, because of how much the mind likes to just think and think and think about things. But in this peaceful state, if we can get there, we start to be able to think of those things without necessarily having this really intense bodily reaction with it. And then you can kind of almost recognize that it's not necessarily a part of yourself and a part of you. And obviously there's many different ways of like, I want to say like coming to peace with those things, or like not staying attached to them. I'm sure Max, you help a lot of people with this, but I just kind of wanted to share that, like, I guess, if some people live their whole lives still attached to something, that's going to be something that they're going to have to deal with next time they come back. And, they're going to continue to have to face these over many, many lives. And that's part of their journey of discovering their soul self. So I those were a couple of things that came to my mind as I was listening to you guys talking.
Thank you for sharing. And as you were saying that, I was reminded of a short little documentary I saw where twin boys grew up in a really abusive household where their father was a drunk and would beat him and go to prison. And one was homeless, a drunk, had a drug problem, and the other one was a judge who had a nice family, had money and everything. And when they interviewed both ones, they said to the homeless guy, "So what happened? Why are you like this?" And he says, "My father was an abusive drunk." And they asked the other one, "Why are you like this?" And he said, "Well, my father was an abusive drunk." And so they both took it in a very different way on how they accepted it and worked through their problems in a same scenario, very different results.
This comes back to just sort of that idea of, and it comes to your mindset. That's why mindfulness is so important, because if you aren't aware of your mindset and managing your mindset to some degree, or navigating what's going on in the mind, you get carried away with these rivers. And we're by default designed to go into the bitter, to make a conscious choice to choose to go into better. It's much harder to do because we have the negativity bias in our nervous system, right?
Yeah.
And so we really have, like, on a basic material level, we could just look at that, like the nervous system is wired with a negativity bias. And so we see all the things that aren't working, all the things that are bad, all the things that we don't like, all the things that we're afraid of. It doesn't mean we can't explore the others, but if we just let ourselves be on that default setting all the time, then we end up down that path. But when we choose, right, and some people just, I think through karma, come in at a young age already having embodied this lesson a little bit, so they're able to do that. And I think for the rest of us, we are having the experiences that allow us the opportunity to come into those awarenesses on our own, should we choose to this lifetime. And so, you know, I have a question for you, Jagai. Do you think, though, if you would have actually could have told your teenager self, that your teenager self would have listened and believed you and been able to actually do it?
Well,
right?
I can tell you that one super pivotal moment of my life, without getting into the details, which is, I don't feel like it, but I was basically homeless and I was hitchhiking. I was about 15. And a guy picked me up. I got in his car and we're just cruising down the road. It was probably 8 o'clock at night. And he just looked at me and he said, "Oh, wait a second. Did you run away from home? Are you a homeless teenager?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Oh," he said, "So was I. And I'm going to tell you something right now. No matter what's happened to you, no matter what anybody did to you, your happiness is completely yours and not anybody else's. If you're miserable, it's your fault. If you're happy, it's your fault. Whatever happens to you is on you." And then there was my stuff. I got out of the car and I sat there for a long time thinking of that. This dude was the only person that was so serious with me and spoke like that. My whole life changed after that. So would I have gone back and listened to me? I don't know. But, you know, it's important that we can flood our minds and others with the correct understanding of things. And hopefully somewhere in that flood of good, positive experience and knowledge, you latch on to something that makes a change. Maybe not.
And that's why I asked the question, because I think a lot of us, people in my generation and in the younger generations, there's a lot of pressure that we put on ourselves of like, man, if I could have just, if somebody would have just told me when I was younger, or like somehow we missed the boat, as opposed to, yes, we need those little droplets of wisdom and mercy and grace by our parents, by random people that we come across, friends that we have, teachers and mentors. Like all those are little droppings so that we can pick them up along the way and find our way, because it is a process. And even though we say like, just let it go, nobody expects that you're all just going to just let it go right now, like a monkey with their hand in the cookie jar. Like,
right? Yeah.
That monkey is struggling, right, to get the cookie out of the cookie jar, but they're holding on so tight and they can't get their hand out of the jar. And you can tell that monkey, let it go, let it go. And all it's thinking of is, if I let it go, I lose the cookie.
Yeah, 100%, 100%.
And until we shift over, until getting my hand out of the jar is more important than the cookie, that moment is when we finally let it go. But it takes a while for us to get to that place where we have to say, getting my hand out of the jar is more important than holding on to this cookie.
Sure.
And so
it can and mostly does take a while, but it doesn't have to.
It doesn't have to, but I just, you know, because we often do that. Like, if I would have just known when I was younger, when we're younger, like I have my kids and I'm, you know, like I have my kids and they say these things and I'm like, you know what would really help with that? Some yoga. I wonder where you could go take a yoga class. Like they have it all right in front, you know. So I just want to leave room for compassion and tenderness with ourselves as we are on a journey, and we can get it all overnight, but we also don't have to. And it isn't doesn't mean you're failing or you're doing it wrong or that something's wrong with you because you didn't do it overnight. Like, give yourself the compassion and the gentleness of like, it sometimes with certain things it does take longer and some things are a little easier, but you keep at it, which is my point. You keep at it, and all that stuff just starts to click up all at the right time, and then you have these deeper knowings, and it's like you can never go back to where you were before.
Yeah, super nice, Dharma. Well said. Very well said.
All right.
All right.
Can we
71.
go on to the next verse, Max?
71. A person who has given up all desires for sense gratification, who lives free from desires, has given up all sense of proprietorship, and is devoid of false ego, he alone can attain real peace.
You know what this immediately made me think of? The verse of the invocation, Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam, because it says, right, that Srila Rupa Goswami was in this material world with the mission to fulfill the desire of the Lord. So the Lord has desires. We have to give up desires. We live free from desires. I want to just unpack this a little bit because I think there also is confusion here, like attachment, desires, and expectations. When they're based in materiality, they keep us really hooked and in that suffering. But when we have desires and attachments and expectations that are, in my opinion, are on a more spiritual plane or spiritual narrative or spiritual objective, that is a different, it's a different, I don't want to say different thing, but it is a different thing. It's a different approach. It's not the same as the material desires. What are your thoughts on that, Jagai?
Yeah, for sure. What you're saying is 100% true. If you look at the Sanskrit, kama is what is the word translated
pleasure,
as desire. Yeah.
pleasure.
So pleasure, joy,
Pleasure.
lust, like, which is very self
gratification
motivated. Yeah. But as you're saying, whose mission was to fulfill the desires of Lord Chaitanya means the Lord has desires, and our desire, so which means we have a desire, is to fulfill the Lord's desire. So do we give up that desire? Is that kama? No, it's spirituality. And so instead of having selfish desires, we have selfless desires. And also it says here, a sense of giving up the sense of proprietorship. Well, you can't have proprietorship if you don't have something. So you have something and you don't have proprietorship over it. You've offered it, though you still are in control of it, right? So it's a little tricky, but it's that the desire is not for us. It's for Krishna, though we have desires. And there's proprietorship, which is not for us, though we still have proprietorship over things.
I think of because I work with a lot of students and coaching clients who want to achieve certain things in life. They have what I often like to refer to as they have a calling from the heart. And that's, to me, I think like a spirit desire. You're called, your spirit is calling you to, take on this career role because in that career role, you feel like you can help people. And there are material things that are attached to that we want to address. Right. And our ideas of sense gratification that comes with those material things, but let's not lose sight on, that heart's desire, because it gets all entangled with the material desires that are on the periphery of that spiritual desire, it's always going to be like that because we are a spiritual being in a material world. And there's this integration that's happening all the time. We can't fully separate unless we leave this body, right? There's always an integration of our heart's desires, our soul's desires, our spiritual desires are interwoven with the material stuff on the outside. But again, the way our come from and what we keep our focus on and where our heart and its allegiance lies, I think makes all the difference of, are we getting all caught up in sense gratification, or are we doing this because we feel called to, but we also know I've been called to do something with a gift that God has given me, instead of I'm so great, I'm going to go be famous because I'm going to take my skill and go do something with it. Like, it's, this approach of really seeing it through the spiritual lens integrated into the material world, and not, you know what I mean? Like, we tend to separate these things, like, you can't, don't enjoy the things that you get from following your heart's calling because you had to give up all sense gratification. Like, there's going to be fruit. We're not entitled to that fruit, but that doesn't mean that Krishna doesn't give us fruit.
Yeah, very, very, very well said. Very well said. And if we just look at the last two lines of this to kind of clarify what you were saying, near mamo, not mine, near ahankara. Ahankara means I'm the doer, not I'm the doer. Near ahankara, near mamo, not mine, I'm not the doer. I attain peace, which means you're getting something. It's not that it's just, you don't get peace, you don't get angry, you don't get anything at all. You're just like a void. You attain peace. And all the last few verses, Krishna's referencing peace as the like result of all this. It's just a given. He doesn't say, well, we should try to attain peace. That's the goal of our life. It's a given that we want happiness, we want peace. And these are all the things that we should avoid to attain it, or we should do to attain it. And here, not mine, not my ego. And in those spaces, we get peace. Sa shantim agachati, we get peace. So with giving up karma, we get peace.
I want to share a little story that I just realized is a great example of this from my own life. There's a person in my sphere right now, they're not so much in there, but they were coming out to the bluff and selling juices, and they just kind of slowed down. They stopped coming out, and they're actually selling smoothies more than juices. But then it kind of died down. The guys stopped coming out. These other guys came out. They're selling juices now, and they're doing cold pressed juices. And there's like this interesting little turf war and ego war going on between them. Well, just mostly the one guy who feels really much like these kids are copying him. And he can't figure out in his own mind why I'm, supporting them and promoting them in the same way I supported and promoted him when he was there. They're getting nothing different than what he got. But in his mind, he's made up this whole story that I made these juices. All my branding, they're copying all my branding, the way that I'm doing my Instagram, the way that I'm taking photos, the videos. Like, he really thinks that these guys have learned everything that they are doing from him, and that they're totally copying him and stealing from him and not giving him any credit. So he's mad at them for doing it. And he's mad that they're also not thanking him and giving him the credit he deserves to his face and to the public. And I can tell you, I'm kind of on the outskirts and I'm watching the whole thing happen. And as frustrating as it is to know this little riff is going on, I also have great compassion and empathy for this guy, because when I was in my 20s, he's not in his 20s, but when I was in my 20s, I was going through the same false ego stuff of like, I'm trying to do this Ayurveda thing, and now everybody else is doing the Ayurveda thing, and that person is copying me. They went to the same school I went to, and you just get caught up in the like, I'm doing all this, I created this, and they owe me this because I am the proprietor of this thing, and everyone else is copying me. And I'm getting to see this person go through this experience, having 20 years of my own life experience away from being in that place where he is now. And I can see it so much more clearly of like, wow, we really, in our own mind, due to our false ego of like, I'm the doer, I own this. And so therefore you owe me this thing because I own this thing. And we're all influencing each other. We're all so interconnected that we can't really, it's what can we really claim complete proprietorship over? Unless we're like an inventor who's actually inventing things. It's harder these days because we're all inspired by each other, right? And we're inspired, and we turn around and we regurgitate it in our own way. But our ego so much wants to claim proprietorship over things. Like, I created this, I'm the doer of this. And it gets us into such a mess.
Super nice. Perfect example. Like these, what you're saying is the negation of these two lines. instead of not mine, mine. Instead of not ahankara, ahankara. I am the doer and it's mine. So instead of attaining peace, you lose peace.
Lose peace. Yep. And I'm not free from it. I still have moments where I'm like, oh, that person feels like they're just sort of like coattailing me or something. But I am able to catch like, oh, my mind is doing that thing. Like I have to let that go. Like people are going to do what they're going to do. And I just got to stay in my own lane. That is where the years and years and years of being mindful of what's going on and having to sit through all the dense forest of my mind that I'm able to see the signs and not get snarled in that and just go, that's just the mind. I gotta let that turbulent river come wash. There it goes again. Ooh, it's coming through. And I just gotta let it go back out into the ocean. It's okay. Go back out into the ocean.
That reminds me of a Thich Nhat Hanh lecture I listened to, where he said that these attachments, when we've grabbed hold of them, it's like a birth. You've given it a life. You said it's a birth. And he said, and with all births, there's a death. So you want to enjoy the birth, but you're also going to suffer the death. So the real reality is, don't give it a birth. You don't have to fight it. Just don't give it a birth. Then you don't suffer the death of it. So this attachment of it's mine, you're going to get the death of that too. You think it's mine. I'm going to enjoy from it. It's going to go away. And then you're going to suffer. Yeah. Okay.
We try to get these last verses in.
Yeah. Who's up? Ashriel?
We got one more verse, 72.
Oh, you have one more? Okay, one more. Who's up? Dharma, did you do two?
I did two. Max did two. It's Azrael's turn. Just one verse left. The last one of the chapter.
That is the way of the spiritual and godly life, after attaining which a man is not bewildered. If one is thus situated, even at the hour of death, one can enter into the kingdom of God.
Could slide in at the 11th hour and still make it.
Yeah, right at the hour of death. Yeah. Interesting. Here's an interesting thing you should do. Go to the Bhagavad Gita and read the last verse of every chapter. And it gives you a summary of the whole Bhagavad Gita. There, every last verse of every chapter is very sweet. That is the way of spiritual and godly life.
I mean, so for me, what I'm gleaning, I mean, we only did the last 10 verses, but I feel like this chapter is really Krishna trying to teach Arjuna how to make peace with his situation and his circumstances. Not to do it perfectly, not to be successful, not to attain or to achieve, but just to make peace so that you can be at peace.
Mm-hmm.
Which I find really comforting and sweet. That, you know, that Krishna isn't just so, there's so many possibilities, and it isn't Krishna just saying like, you just got to be this super disciplined person and just, you know, don't participate in life. It's all an illusion, and just meditate and return back to Godhead. Like he's not coming down with a hammer. He is actually like, you know, showing in many, many ways. And I feel like in this chapter for the first time, I'm realizing how much Krishna wants us to be at peace. He really does. He's trying to offer us a way here.
This is a super nice Sanskrit verse. Again, all these words you really actually know if we just go through it real quick. Esha means this. Brahma, like Brahma, the spiritual stuff. Stita means what?
Situated or steady.
Situated in a Brahman, situated in spirituality. Partha, that means Arjuna. So this person being situated in spirituality, Nayanam, is not prapya, get, vimuya, or like vimudha or mudha, bewildered, ignorant, fooled, stupefied. So those who are situated in Brahma, situated in Brahman, they don't get bewildered. And then stita, so what does stita mean again? Situated, right? Those who are situated, anta kale, at the end of time. Kala means time. Brahma nirvanam. What does nirvana mean?
Like a level of liberation. Yeah.
Like liberation.
Beyond.
Vana means a forest, and nir means not. So not being lost in a forest is what nirvana means. Yeah. So Brahma nirvana means not in this world are we lost. And you attain that richity, which also means like taste. So it's a very simple verse, and it's very clear. Situated in Brahma, one is not bewildered. And when one is situated at the end of time, one attains Brahma Nirvana. Super clear. Y'all are Sanskritists.
Well, we have about 10, 13 minutes left. Maybe we can just close out with some last thoughts about this chapter or these verses.
I may jet a few minutes early. I've got to get my kids over to the school and I have a phone call at 3:30. So
okay.
Yeah, a few minutes early just to get going. But yeah, what's your thoughts? That was a great chapter. It's the summary of the Bhagavad Gita, essentially. That's what the name of the chapter entitled is. Contents of the Gita summarized.
I mean, look where text 1 starts. Seeing Arjuna full of compassion, Krishna's full of compassion. Having compassion for the people he's about to go war against. His mind oppressed. And then we end the chapter with Krishna being like, I want you to be at peace, my friend. Like, just be at peace.
Right? And he's called Madhusudana, or the one who kills the demon of the mind. So right off the beginning, you get a taste that this is going to be about the mind, the one who's going to slay the mind. Very poetic Bhagavad Gita.
Thoughts, Azriel, Max? I'm here if you're willing and able to share. You're welcome to. If you want to go, just unmute yourself and you can share. If you're not wanting to share, you don't have to unmute yourself.
I was also a few moments ago thinking of the distress of Arjuna that the chapter starts in, how it's a nice transition at the end that Krishna's kind of just saying, just be still. And it's almost like he's saying like, and give it all to me, right? Like when people say, you just give it up to God or something like that. I was thinking of like being in distress and thinking, why does this happen to me? Or like manifesting something great and thinking like, look at what I did. But to be still and to be fixated in our relationship with Krishna or with God is to be like, well, all these blessings have been bestowed upon me because I'm doing it in the right way, or because of Krishna, thanks to him, right? Or this difficult thing that's happening to me is thanks to Krishna, I have this opportunity to work through this karma that I'm going through. So when we're still in him, we are able to be free from that karma, kind of like Krishna's saying.
Yeah, it shows how much compassion and love our Krishna has, because this chapter starts with Arjuna sad and crying, and Krishna has such compassion for him that through the whole chapter he's saying, to be happy, peace, shanti, this is the problem, your mind, this and that. And then if you get peace this way and be peaceful, he's trying to alleviate his friend's misery by speaking to him. He has love for him, and Arjuna is sad, and he's like, this is how to be peaceful, like this, that, and the other thing. He cares. He's not just like, shut up, pick up your crap, get the hell out there. He has compassion for him. And
he also is cajoling him. He's using a little bit of that like humor when he's like, this is degrading. Like, what are you doing, man? Like, this is not becoming of you. It's not in a condescending way. It really does show, again, and emphasize that sort of playful side of Krishna, which I really do think is representative of what Bhakta Max was just saying, is like, I'm so grateful for this opportunity, whether it's an opportunity to grow or it's an opportunity to rise to the challenge. I'm reminded of an experiment they did in this, it was referenced in this book called Grit. And they did an experiment with kids where they would bring them into the room and put these challenging puzzles in front of them to see how kids would respond. And they're young kids, like kindergarten, first and second grade ages. And some kids would just come in, and if it was really challenging, they would feel defeated and they would just not try. And the researcher referenced one child who really like had a lasting impression on her. And this kid came in and sat down, saw the puzzle, and he like put his hands together and he was like, I love a good challenge, And so she's trying to reference this concept of having grit, this grit inside of us that allows us to really show up in this way that, of like, yeah, I'm willing for we see it all as opportunities. And, it's just Krishna being this supreme comedian, trying to make us laugh about it all, but we're all just, the growth mindset. There you go. That's a great book. Yeah. That's the name of it. The Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck. Super good book. Azriel has shared here. I'm going to read it for you. So she said, I enjoy listening to the conversation about false ego. I have matured through that in many ways and appreciated you sharing that. The baby is singing and finding her voice, and it's loud, and she didn't want to bother us. So they go through that. So thanks for being here, Azriel. I feel like it hasn't even been a year, I feel like, since you started kind of coming around. I feel like around a little bit before the grand opening, maybe, but really at the grand opening of the studio in October, you kind of really connected and dove in with us. And I can just say, even in that time, even from a distance of where I'm at, I can see like you shifting and showing up differently, even in your posture and in the way you carry yourself and the way you speak. Not like drastically, but I can see these little tiny shifts that are pivotal, even though they're small. So I see it. I see you.
And I agree 100%. And I can say the same thing for Max.
Yes.
Both
Absolutely.
Max and Ashrial and others who've come to this Gita class, and also through my whole experience and meeting with people in different scenarios. There's a little spark that you can see in somebody, and you can kind of tell right away, like, oh, okay, you're starting back from something from a previous life, or you're there, like, we're going to see you around. There's just that little spark. Max, Azriel, others, Ed was a perfect example. Yeah. Ed showed up, and he was like one of the very first conversations I had with Ed. No joke. He was sitting at the eating, and he said, so how do I get all this knowledge? How do I study? And I was like, and I thought, like, oh my God, there's so many books, there's so much. And like, dude, you got a ways to go. And I'm like, you just get going and just start reading. And look at him, look at Ed now. Yeah.
He's got so many books. He's read a lot of them, and he's just, I mean, all of you, Max, everybody, you guys have, I feel like Jagai's right. We see you as a little spark, and then we see you like turn into this campfire, and then we see you turn into this bonfire. And it's really amazing and such a blessing to be able to watch and participate and support you in that journey and add fuel to your very beneficial.
Yeah. And
Tejas,
so,
fire.
and so many times, especially like this weekend, I had a few people come up to me. Oh, thank you, Jagai. Thank you, Jagai. Thank you, Jagai. Thank you, Jagai. But I'm going to tell you in truth and honesty, the gift of spirituality, of the gift that Krishna gives me, is to be able to participate and witness somebody's creeper of bhakti opening up and flourishing in spiritual life. That's the gift, because it's amazing, it's beautiful, and I get to witness it, though I've got all sort of faults. I don't have any qualifications to be doing this, literally, but I do get that gift from Krishna, and that's the best. It's the best thing. You know, like just this weekend, Rebecca, who I guess is not online, but she was, you know, one of us coming to this thing, and you know, she started saying, Krishna's talking to me, wants me to go and be part of a temple and wants me to do service. And I'm like, oh my God. And now she's fully connected, fully absorbed in temple service. And when I saw her this weekend, she's a totally transformed person.
Yeah, I would concur with everything you just said, especially just as it's such a gift. It is a gift to participate and be a witness to it.
It's a gift.
Thank you all.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna bail because I got to get my kids over to the school.
Panchakalpa Tarubhyascha, Kripasidhya Evacha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah.
Vaishnava Sadhu Sangha ki
Jai. All right, Hari Bol, everyone.
Hari Bol.
See you soon.